Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Richard A. Stevens, author of the epic fantasy series The Legends of Lurker, the Bainbridge companion novels, the Soulforge Saga, and the Highcliffe Guardians. Filling in for Christy Stratos is my amazing co-host David M. Kelly, author of the science fiction series Joe Ballon, the series Logan's World, and several standalone books, including the anthology Dead Reckoning and other stories. Looking for Legends is a live interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or comment on what you hear in the show. Tonight, we're excited to have with us Nebula finalist science fiction author Jeffrey A. Carver. Welcome, Jeffrey. We're glad to have you here tonight.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Before we get started, Jeff, for those who may not know who you are, and I don't know who that would be, please tell us a little bit about
many such people. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been writing science fiction for most of my adult life, all of my adult life, I guess. Publishing since the 1970s, and I'm probably best known for my series, The Chaos Chronicles, which is what I'm actively working on right now, as well as not so much a series exactly, as a group of books set in the universe called the Star Rigger universe, which started my one of my very first novels was Star Rigger's Way, and that kind of set the tone for it. My novel in that universe, Eternity's End, was the one that was nominated for Nebula. And I've done a number of standalone books, as well as the novelization of Battlestar Galactica, the miniseries that kicked off the Ronald Moore version of Battlestar Galactica on Sci-Fi Channel. What more can I tell you? I used to be an avid scuba diver, and I learned to fly, but being a writer, I didn't have the money to afford to fly, so I got my pilot's license gathering dust, and think about it all the time and wish I could go back to doing that. Let's see, I live in the Boston area, and I've done a fair amount of teaching of writing, both with high school age kids, actually middle-aged kids. Had a TV show for a while on educational television called Writing Science Fiction and Fantasy, and that was a lot of fun. And that resulted in the content of that is online for free at writesf.com, which is just a kind of a guide to beginners in writing, which anyone's welcome to drop in on. And I'm working right now on book 7 of the Chaos Chronicles.
That's awesome. And one of our viewers saying, amazing, congrats on your awards. What inspired you to become a writer, and why science fiction?
Well, the why science fiction is the easy part of it, because I loved science fiction from the very beginning of my reading as a kid. I grew up on, I guess when I was really young, the Heinlein Juveniles and Tom Corbett's Space Cadet and the Tom Swift Jr. series, and then grew into the kind of the classic writers, Asimov and Clarke and Adult Heinlein and so many other people. And when I was in, I guess I was 12. I was in 6th grade, so at 12, I sat down with my best friend and we composed a story, and we each wrote our own version of it. It was called The Mysterious Midnight Ride, and we were the heroes. And we were up against an evil person called Rock Jekyll, and I still have that hand-printed, hand-illustrated book somewhere buried on my desk. And I just, I don't know. I sort of, by the time I was in college, I started to think, maybe writing is what I want to do, and I got encouragement from teachers and family, and I don't know. Something drew me into it, and I can't really tell you what it was, but there was never any question about what I would be writing, because science fiction was my love. Although, interestingly enough, my favorite book as a reader is The Lord of the Rings, and I think that influenced some of my writing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That's so. What I know, David, being a science fiction author himself, is going to monopolize you probably throughout most of this. So I'm just going to I want to get this in before that, and then I'll just kind of disappear in the background here. But last what I counted on your website, you have 20 books out. I'm sure there's probably more that I didn't see. But
yeah, if you include the short story collections, yeah, I guess.
Right, standalone short fiction. Yeah. Are they mostly interrelated in some aspect, or have you created a totally different universe for each series?
No, the Chaos Chronicles and the Star Rigger universe are entirely unconnected, as far as I know right now. Isaac Asimov brought his robot series together with his Foundation series well after they were had been out for quite a long time. I have no intention of doing that. Well, let me put it this way. If there's a connection, I have not yet discovered the connection. Now, two of my books, they were published as a duo, From a Changeling Star and Down the Stream of Stars, did ultimately become connected with the Chaos books, because there was a robot in them named Jeeves, and he turned up as a character in the Chaos books. And that's when I realized that those two are kind of, they're not part of the story arc of the books called the Chaos Chronicles, but they are part of the same universe.
Yeah, I've read several of the Chaos books. And at the moment I'm actually reading The Rapture Effect, which I'm enjoying a lot.
Oh, thank you.
I picked it up quite a while back, and it's been on my list, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to start reading that. And I've been totally drawn into it. It's
good.
It's an amazing story, and the kind of the visual aspects of the writing are really quite amazing. I was very surprised at how vivid it was. And that was something I guess I'd like to kind of like ask. I mean, you're kind of known for writing hard science fiction, and yet I find that your work has a lot of vivid imagery and a lot of vivid characters as well. And I was just wondering, could you talk about that a little bit?
You know, I've never been altogether comfortable being labeled a hard science fiction writer, because I'm not in the same way that, I don't know, somebody like Greg Egan is, or the people, or Stephen Baxter. I'm not writing the same kind of stories that they do, and yet I do try to keep the science, be as faithful to the science before I start extrapolating. I mean, I go way beyond science as we know it now, but I try to do it from a starting point of accurate science, and okay, where might that go if things really explode in our scientific understanding? So in that sense, yeah, the hard science fiction label does apply, but characters have always been the most important part for me of the storytelling. So I consider myself as somehow straddling. There's a boundary zone between space opera and hard science fiction and character science fiction, and I'm somewhere in the nebulous region among those three things. And so the labels have never quite felt accurate to me, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
And when I was a young writer, space opera was a kind of a derogatory term. It was kind of like the pulpy action adventure stuff that had lousy writing and cardboard characters. Now it's used in a complimentary way much more often. So it took me a while to say, yeah, okay, my stuff is in some measure space opera as well.
Right.
But really, it comes to characters is almost always the starting point in my story, and the thing that I focus the most on.
Thank you. So you I don't know how to say this entirely politely, but you've been around for a while. So what kind of changes have you kind of like seen in the industry since then, from your early days to more recently?
It doesn't even feel like the same industry. I mean, the most striking transformation, of course, is in the last 15 or 20 years with the self-publishing revolution and the audiobook revolution. When I got into the business, almost everybody started by writing short fiction and trying to sell it to the magazines. There were, I don't know, 5 or 6 influential magazines. The most prominent were Analog and Fantasy and Science Fiction, and Galaxy was still around when I started publishing. Asimov's didn't yet exist. But that was really where you got started. And there was no such thing as online publishing because there was no internet. So you printed out, well, you didn't print out, you typed your manuscript. And if you were lucky enough to have a Xerox place nearby, you'd make a copy and you'd put it in an envelope and you'd send it with a self-addressed stamped envelope so they could return it to you. And then you'd wait weeks, months, sometimes many months. Sometimes you have to wait a long time to hear back from a particular market. And if it came back, you'd stick it right in another envelope and send it to the next market on your list. So it was a very, nothing like the lightning submission now of emailing a Word document or however you submit. And the only real route to book publication was through the traditional press in New York. So once I had a few things under my belt, I got an agent and started submitting to the New York publishers. And Dell Books was my first major publisher. My first book was published by Laser Books, which was an imprint, a short-lived imprint of Harlequin Publications. They briefly got into science fiction, and that gave me my break because I was able to actually offered a contract by them to write a novel, and that got me into the industry and got me an agent, and then I sold a book, several books to Dell, but then Dell went out of the science fiction business, and I moved from several times from publisher to publisher as science fiction programs grew and then folded and then new ones started. And so I was at Tor for the longest period of time. And so the first 4 books of the Chaos Chronicles were published originally by Tor Books and then later by my own imprint. And then the last 2, books 5 and 6, I published myself through my imprint of Starstream Publications. So to go from the way I described getting started to now, there's so many choices about how to try to get your books before an audience. I think traditional publishing still has plenty of value, but for a lot of us, people who were in the so-called mid-list, where we weren't selling like bestsellers, we had maybe sometimes many people like me had substantial and appreciative audiences, but not enough for the publishers to regard us as bestsellers.
Right.
And people like in that sort of category tended to get dropped by publishers a lot. So I have quite a number of colleagues who, like me, are now publishing primarily independently, though we got our start in traditional publishing. So I'm not saying I'll never publish traditionally again, but right now, that's the way it's working for me.
Thank you.
When I first started teaching writing, and people would ask about publishing, I would say, don't self-publish, because that just kind of marks you as someone who isn't good enough to get published. And I think it was true at the time. Mm. And then everything changed. So self-publication is no longer a marker of it doesn't say loser. It says you're going a different way, and maybe you really have something to offer that traditional publishing doesn't want to publish. So.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of people making big bucks in self-publishing.
Well, yeah, I think many self-published authors are actually doing better financially than a lot of the people doing traditionally.
Yeah, it's just a matter of figuring it out. So we got a question here from one of the viewers saying, the characters you write about, do they represent to a small or large degree people in your life, or are they totally fictitious? And I thought it was interesting when you talked about when you first started writing and your first book that you wrote as a child. You guys, like, you were one of the characters in the books, correct?
Yes.
Yes. I was the same way. I wrote a Hardy Boys book, and I was Frank, and my buddy was Joe, and away we went. So anyway, to answer that question,
everybody I meet and talk to and read about influences me in some way. So characters are drawn from a whole array of sources, I guess. And yes, I have occasionally based particular characters on people, sometimes just for fun, like naming characters after real people, and sometimes I've auctioned off the naming rights to be a character in a book for a charity auction and that kind of thing. Mostly the characters I write just come into my head, and I'm sure that there are elements of me and there are elements of other people I've known in them, but for the most part, that's not a conscious thing. Although there was a short story about it's called Shapeshifter Finals, and it recently was republished in a book that Ed Willett edited called Shapers of Worlds, Volume 2. And it was about a wrestler, a human wrestler who is participating in an interstellar wrestling tournament. And he's up against a shapeshifter, which is an interesting challenge for him. And I was a wrestler in high school. And there's a scene in there where the other guy has his leg up in the air and he's hopping and hopping and hopping on the mat. And that wasn't me. That was one of my teammates who actually did that in a real match. So I do steal from real life whenever it's possible. And in Neptune Crossing, there's a scene on Triton, the moon of Neptune, a mining scene that is drawn straight from my personal experience working on an automotive assembly line in Ohio when I was in college. So
one of the things I noticed on your blog, Jeff, was the big oops.
Oh wait, you mean the
big oops?
The printing error?
Yes.
What were you talking about?
That just looks like an absolute nightmare. I mean, just to explain to people watching, you published the book, and including print books, and somehow two of the chapters got juggled or something.
It was Eternity's End. Which was I reprinted under my own imprint, both in ebook, and this all started when I brought out my own print edition. And there's a print typesetting tool that a lot of people use called Vellum, which kind of produces a pretty good looking print book with relatively little, you don't have to know how to use InDesign or anything like that to produce a pretty good looking print book. And I had used that, and they also put out a pretty nice looking ebook. So I'd had it out in ebook for years, but I decided to spiff it up and make the ebook look nice the way the print book looked. But what I didn't know was that when you're working in the program, you have, on the sidebar, you have all the chapters. And unfortunately, you can drag and drop the chapters, and you can do it without realizing you've done it. And the numbers are applied automatically. You don't see them. So it's not obvious that you have switched some chapters around. So somehow I managed to drag a chapter about halfway through the book to another location and didn't realize it. And it must have happened at the very end of the kind of tweaking process. Mm-hmm. So the first I heard of it was when I got an email from somebody who had bought the ebook and said, something didn't seem right in the way this stuff was happening. And so I went and took a look, and I was just horrified to see what I'd done.
Oh, I can't imagine.
So I had to correct it as fast as I could in the print edition, as well as all of the ebook, the Kindle, the Nook, the edition for all the other stores, and hope that not too many people had bought the wrong edition. The ebook was less of a problem, I guess, because they can download the corrected version easily. If someone bought the print edition, or God forbid a library bought the print edition, and nobody is aware, it's just I don't know. I'm just trying to think about it.
But that also makes that book worth a little bit of money.
Well, maybe so. Maybe I shouldn't have recycled the bad copies I had. Anyway.
That's interesting. Yeah, I do that in Word. I've got they have the same thing in Word where you can move the chapters around. And I sometimes do that on purpose because the way I write, I figure, well, this chapter actually seems a bit better up here. But so I noticed when I was going through your website and stuff, and I know you mentioned Tor. You're publishing. Are you publishing solely now yourself, or are you still going through? Are you like a hybrid author?
Well, I consider myself a hybrid author, but at the moment, there's nothing new in the pipeline other than the book that I'm writing. So, which I expect to self-publish because it's book 7 in a series that, as far as the traditional press is concerned, is out of print. So I don't think it's realistic to think that anyone would want to pick that up. As for the future, I don't know. Yeah, we'll wait and see. I'm a very slow writer, so it took me many years longer to write the last pair of books. They was actually written as a single book, but it turned out to be enormous. It took 11 years to write, and I split it into 2 volumes. It's really a single story. The Reefs of Time and Crucible of Time are a 2-volume story. And by the time it was ready for publication, Tor had moved on, and they just weren't interested in doing it anymore. So, and I had an amicable settlement with them on that. But I don't know. By the time I'm done with the next book, maybe the whole landscape will have changed yet again, and there'll be another choice. You can say. So
I see you publish under, or at least there's a thing you can click on for Star Rigger Books. Now, Star Rigger is obviously the name of the one series. Is Star Rigger Books, is that your publishing, your independent publishing label?
Oh, you must be talking about my Etsy shop.
Yes, it did take me to the Etsy shop, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I sell autographed print books. My imprint for my self-publishing is called Starstream Publications, and that name comes from a changeling star where a supernova is united. Anyway, an interstellar pathway called the Starstream is created, and that plays an important role in the Reefs of Time also. I just picked Star Rigger Books as a name for the bookshop because Star Rigger is what my website is based on, starrigger.net. So it was a handy title. But it is solely to sell autographed copies of my own books, both the original first editions and my Starstream editions. So go take a look at my Etsy shop if you like print books, especially autographed books.
When I was in there, I was quite happy to see the Star Rigger 3. It's got a dragon on the cover.
There were 2 dragon books in the Star Rigger. Dragons in the Stars and Dragon Rigger, which is a direct sequel to Dragons in the Stars. That's where the Tolkien influence, I think, came in Dragon Rigger. And they were the closest I have come to writing fantasy. They're science fiction. They're about space travel, but they have dragons, and there are parts. There's a feel of the fantasy world in those stories, even though they're set in a science fictional landscape.
And so do your dragons fly through space, or are they just particular to that planet?
It's not a planet. It's a hyperdimensional realm called the Flux, which starships travel through in this universe. And the dragons live there. It has its own landscape. It's not on a planet as we know planets. It's just a completely different sort of continuum from what we know. And starships pass through once in a while, and the starship pilots are called riggers. And rigging a starship is a little bit like writing a story. You reach out through this sensory net and interpret what's out there through your own imagination to get to sort of create a landscape that you can navigate through. And except there are real things out there too, and some of them are dragons. So my rigger named JL gets tangled up with the Dragon's World and Dragon's Civil War, I guess you could say. Those were a lot of fun to write. I enjoyed those books.
Now, I noticed that you did the novelization of the Battlestar Galactica reboot. Would you like to tell us how you got involved with that?
I got a phone call. I was another book that took me a long time was Sunborn, the fourth Chaos book, and I had just finished the first draft of it, which seemed to take half a lifetime. And I got a call from my editor at Tor, and he said, "Hey, have you watched the new Battlestar Galactica?" And I said, "Well, interestingly enough, I have, because in those days you had to have the right cable channel package to get the sci-fi channel to watch it, and I didn't have the right package, and it was too cheap to pay for the extra package just for that one channel. But the cable guy was hooking up the neighbor, and he accidentally turned on the sci-fi channel to my cable. I only learned this later when he turned it off. But for some reason, I suddenly started getting the sci-fi channel, and Battlestar Galactica was just coming on. I was not a fan of the original BSG, and my first thought was, why are you rebooting this? But I watched it anyway, and I thought it was really good. I was quite taken by surprise by it. And then I forgot all about it. And about 6 months later, I guess, I got this phone call saying, "You want to write the novelization of that miniseries?" And I said, "Well, Jim, you know that I'm years behind on the book that I'm writing for you right now, right?" He said, "Yeah, how you doing on that?" "Well, I just finished the first draft." He said, "That's perfect. You need to set it aside for a couple of months and do this other one." So I did. And it was a really interesting experience, change of pace for me, because I was no longer trying to come up with all the details of the story. The story was there. My challenge was to tell it as well as I could in the form of a novel, and elaborate where I could, where I was permitted. And it turned out I was fairly limited in what I was allowed to do, because when I said, "Well, they seem to have an interesting connection with religion there. Can I do something with that?" No. We're doing stuff with religion in the series as it progresses, so don't do that. I was warned off of a few things. So I basically tried to give the texture to it and give it the pacing of a novel. And it was really a challenge in a craft kind of sense. There were a number of scenes that were fun to watch on TV, but when you actually sat and thought about them, they didn't entirely make sense. For instance, early in the story, there's a scene where they're gathered on the hangar deck of the Galactica for a decommissioning ceremony. And the Viper pilots do this really impressive flyby over the heads of all the gathered dignitaries. Well, and it looked great on the camera. And then I thought, wait a minute, they're in a closed hangar deck. It's open at either end when it's open to the vacuum, but they're in a sealed, closed hangar deck. How are they seeing these Vipers fly over their heads? So I had to wrestle with that for quite a while, and finally I just decided on very large monitor screens at either end, so they could see the Vipers coming and then see them disappearing, and the other way. And it's, a lot of that kind of thing in the translation from a script to a book. So it was just 3 months I spent doing that, but I had a really good time. And it was fun to be associated with what turned out to be a really landmark TV series.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see the question. Have I always written full time? No, I've held any number of part-time jobs over the years. I worked as a sorter for UPS for a while. I worked as one summer as a quahog diver. I tried to become a scuba instructor for a while. I was a scuba instructor for a while, but it turned out to be, excuse me, You could barely make a living doing that full time, much less try to write on the side. In the end, I married well. My wife has a good paying job, and my first piece of advice to anyone considering a writing career is marry someone who has a full time job that they enjoy.
That's awesome. So, scuba diving.
Yeah, I love the undersea.
Yeah, no, my wife and I, we used to scuba dive. We don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, where's the most interesting place you've scuba dove?
Oh, well, I've been to places like the Cayman Islands that have gorgeous diving. But in a way, the most interesting place was in the waters off Rhode Island, where I learned to dive, which have terrible visibility and don't have any of the colorful reefs. But it's a very sort of, because it's so hazy and it has an otherworldly feel to it that's different from what you get in those clear tropical waters. So it's and night diving, which I did there sometimes, is really an otherworldly experience, and I really enjoyed doing that. And that was a real life experience that I did translate into my writing. Particularly the Infinite Sea, which is the third book of the Chaos series, is set largely underwater on another planet. And I wasn't translating so much the real life, how do you do this, so much as what does it feel like to be underwater? What are the sounds and tactile sensations and smells and all that to make that feel real.
For sure, it's a totally different world down there. That's for sure. So you had mentioned before we come on here that most of your books are available in audiobooks, and as I was telling you, I originally went through audio or royalty share through Audible. Now I'm getting out of that, and I'm now with Findaway Voices. Who do you go through to do your audiobooks? I know you really love your narrator.
Yeah, I decided. Well, about half my books were already in Audible because my agent had sold the rights directly to Audible, where I had no influence over the narrator. But the ones that were not in audiobook that way, which were the Chaos books and Eternity's End, and basically my best known books, were not in audiobook. And because I didn't have this great track record in audiobook sales, I decided to do it myself, and some money became available to me to pay for a narrator who was really, really good. So I hired Stefan Rudnicki, who is a narrator for Orson Scott Card and tons of other great writers. And he has just an amazing deep bass voice and remarkable control, and is great to work with. So I go through both Findaway and ACX, which feeds Audible, because I started with Findaway, and to those who are new to this, Findaway Voices is a distributor to pretty much all of the audiobook stores in the world, everywhere, and to libraries that handle audiobooks. And if you want a wide distribution, that's the way to go. And if you want to be able to do promotions through Chirp Books, which is related to BookBub, you got to go through Findaway for that. And it's great, but most of the sales are actually through Audible. And I just found that it worked better for my Audible distribution to go straight to them through ACX. So when I had a new book, when the recordings were ready, I went to both places. I went non-exclusive to ACX and non-exclusive to Findaway as well. And people will say, well, you probably make more money just going exclusive with Audible because you get a higher royalty rate. And that might be true, but then you don't get into libraries, and then you don't have a way to run promotions to introduce new readers to you, which Chirp Books does. I've had several promotions now at Chirp Books that have sold lots of audiobooks for a low price to introduce people to the books and hopefully make them new readers. So I've always, in all of my self-publishing stuff, I've aimed to go as wide as possible. I don't like to do exclusive with anybody. So I've never done the Kindle exclusive things. You know, and it might not be the best. I don't know if it's the right way to go for dollars and cents, but I think it's the right way to go for reaching the maximum number of readers, or at least being available to the maximum number.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was saying before we got started was that when I was setting out to do these audiobook editions, I'm an avid audiobook listener, and I have learned through listening to good and bad narrators that a good narrator can absolutely make a book, and a bad narrator can destroy even a really good book. And I wanted, since I was able to do this, I wanted to have the best narration I could for the best experience for the readers, both just to give readers the best experience, and you know, in the long run, I think it'll pay off. It means I'm in the hole for the now, but you know, that'll come back to me, and I own the rights to the recordings, so I'm not getting like a 25% share from a publisher. So you know, it's not, maybe not the right. There is no right way to do this. There are better ways for some people and better ways for other people, and each writer has to kind of discover the best way for them to do it.
No, exactly.
So,
no, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. Jeffrey, you were saying earlier that you don't consider yourself to be a fast writer, and I was just wondering how do you fit in the sort of plotter versus pantser role? Does that mean that you're kind of more of a plotter perhaps than a pantser?
Oh, I'm a discoverer, or a gardener, or you know, I always have a rough outline of a book when I start, but it's always rough. And there are a lot of, usually I know the beginning and I know kind of what the end is, and I know a little bit about what's in the middle. I don't seem to be able to outline in great detail very successfully. Although I actually did that with the Rapture Effect. That was one book where I decided to try outlining in detail ahead of time to see if it could speed up the process. And what happened was I found things would change, and then suddenly, all right, my outline isn't right anymore. I discover the story as I'm writing it, and I don't suggest this as the best way to write or anything like that. It's just what works for me. I envy the people who can see the whole story laid out in detail, so they sit down and they know what this chapter is about and exactly what happens, because I will often start a new chapter and I go, what's happening? What? I don't know. Somebody tell me. And so I go down a lot of dead ends in my first drafts, trying to find the right way. And sometimes I find the dead end. Oh, maybe that's not a dead end. Maybe that actually does go somewhere. And it is a slow way to write, and it's a nerve-wracking way to write sometimes, but that's the way my brain works. My editor from Tor said to me once, he said, "You are probably the most intuitive writer I've ever worked with," by which he meant I didn't know what the hell I was doing until I'd done it and discovered what my subconscious had been doing. I see another discoverer. Hi, glad to have company.
Well, I think we're a pretty big tribe. Now, did you mention the word gardener? Is that what you said?
Gardener.
Did you say you're a gardener writer?
Oh, gardener, as opposed to, yes. I don't like the plotter and pantser.
I've never heard gardener
never
before.
Worked for me. I don't know who came up with this. I heard it somewhere, but gardener and nurturer of the story is one way that some people have described it. And I thought, that fits me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really neat. So I find when I'm the same way as you, and when I get to a new chapter, but what I do is I will come up with the chapter name right off the hop, and then I will write to the chapter name, and that just seems to fill my chapter in for me. But at that point, I don't know what's going to happen in the chapter. I just have to get to the name. That's kind of like following a carrot.
You know, when my first few books, I didn't have chapter titles. It wasn't a particular decision. I just didn't put titles on them. And what got me started titling my chapters, it was a ploy to try to force the publishers. And since I wrote long books, and the publishers would try to make the type a little bit small, and sometimes the chapters wouldn't start on a new page, which drove me crazy. So I thought, well, if I put a chapter title, they pretty much have to start on a new page. So that's actually why I did that the first time I did it. I forget which book it was that I did that on, because I was annoyed at the typesetting. It got me to create chapter titles, and I've just stuck with that ever since. I kind of like chapter titles as a reader, you know.
I work, I think, a similar way. I tend to kind of like know where I'm going with the story, and I know some of the kind of key points throughout the story, but then kind of like most of the story kind of develops organically, and quite often I don't really know what's going to happen next.
The thing is, it has to make sense at the end.
Yes.
And I've often spent a lot of time writing a story, just praying, don't let this be stupid when I get to the end. And so far, I think it's worked out okay. But it puts a heavier burden, I think, on the rewriting process, because you really have to ruthlessly weed out the stuff that doesn't make the story progress further. And you have to have good feedback from people you trust, and you have to give a sharp editorial view. So it's really the mindset first drafting is don't edit yourself too much, because you really want your imagination free to explore where the story might go. And then when you're rewriting, it's like, okay, now edit yourself, because you don't want the reader to be bogged down in all this stuff that didn't go anywhere.
Go
ahead.
You were saying that it's important to have, for instance, your wife supporting you by having a job, and I know, for example, Richard's wife is very active in supporting him in his writing, and mine is with mine. Does your wife help you with your actual writing as well?
Does she what?
Does she help you with the actual writing process as well?
And not the writing process. Well, sometimes I bounce ideas off her. She has come up with some pretty good ideas. And she's always one of my readers once I have it in fairly good shape. She's actually a professional editor, not of fiction. But she has a very keen eye for language and things that need tightening up and that sort of thing. And she's an avid reader. She loves science fiction. But she waits until, if I come to her and say, I just can't think of what's going on here. And sometimes she'll come up with ideas for me. But beyond that, she kind of waits until I'm at the second or third draft of where it's really pretty readable. Because she's, when you're editing something, when you're critiquing something, you have to really distinguish between looking at the actual, copy editing the language and fixing the little things versus saying, okay, what's happening in the big picture, and is this chapter even working? You can spend a lot of time fixing the language when really it should all be cut anyway and replaced with something different. So it's kind of the difference between developmental editing, where you're really looking at the big picture, how pieces fit together, versus the copy editing, where you're really looking at the language and consistency and things like that.
So another viewer, Hillary, says, "Which of your books would you recommend for someone who's just starting to get into sci-fi?"
Probably Neptune Crossing, which starts the Chaos Chronicles. I think is a good approachable book, and it has fun characters and a fair amount of humor. And and gets you into a story that'll take you for a while. If you like stuff that's a little more toward the fantastical end of things, then maybe Dragons of the Stars and the sequel Dragon Rigger would be a good way to go.
I can't argue with dragons in the books. So I was just gonna, before we wrap up here, Jeff, what is next? I know you mentioned you're working on something now. So what is next in Jeffrey Carver's world?
Well, I'm working on Masters of Shipworld, which is the 7th and I believe final volume of the Chaos Chronicles. It's been going hard, to be honest. I don't know if it's a pandemic or what, but I'm struggling a bit with that, and this is something that happens. So, and after that, I don't know. I have ideas for other things, but I don't really like to talk too much about things that are just ideas, because then people expect it to happen. And I have lots of ideas that maybe I don't get to, or get to much later than I thought I would.
So these are still in the dirt in your garden?
Yes.
Yes.
There's seeds
with
with little sticks over them.
And that's awesome. And where can people find your books?
Where do you want to find them? You can find them anywhere. You can find the ebooks in all of the major ebook stores. You can find the print editions from Amazon, from I like bookshop.org, which is a print book retailer that contributes a portion of their earnings to independent bookstores. If you like to buy books online, but you want to support independent bookstores, bookshop.org is a good place to look. And many of my print books are available there. Audiobooks in your favorite audiobook store. Go to my website, starrigger.net, and I have links to where you can buy my books in all of the different forms.
All right,
and
that's awesome.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if you like kind of vintage first editions of the original publisher's editions of some of my books, I have available in autographed copies through my Etsy store, Star Rigger Books.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. I'm going to have to look into getting myself an Etsy store, I think. Anyway, thank you for joining us today, Jeff. And if you want to come back on in the future, maybe to launch a new book, just hook us up and we'll get you back on and we'll talk about your new book when it comes out.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
And so just before we go, Dave, what's new in the David Kelly universe?
Minus 20 degrees and lots of snow.
I mean book-wise.
Well, that was new and a shock this morning, I'll tell you. Not a lot for me at the moment. I'm a little bit like Jeffrey in that I'm kind of working my way through editing, and I've had a lot of distractions this year, so it's gone a little bit slower than I wanted to do, but I'm hoping that the next Logan Two Feathers book will be coming out in the new year very shortly.
Awesome. So I guess myself, the only thing I have going on is I just discovered that Keeper the Jewel is actually now available on Audible. Like I said earlier, that my original books were all on Audible, so though I went to Find Away Voices, I wanted to make sure that my Audible listeners could, stay up to date with my universe. So I published through Find Away, but it downloads to Audible, and it is now available on Audible as well. So Keeper the Jewel is now available on Audible. But other than that, I'm still working on book 3, Windwalker, and I'm about 43,000 words into it. And hopefully we'll get that out by end of April or something like that. Anyway, thanks again, Jeff, for joining us. And next week's guest will be fantasy author Marie Powell. Marie Powell's castle hopping adventures across North Wales to explore her family roots resulted in her award-winning historical fantasy series, Last of the Gifted, at a Spirit Sight and Water Sight. Marie is also the author of more than 40 children's books with such publishers as Scholastic Education and Amicus. So, looking for legends, looks forward to speaking with Marie next week. And until we meet again, Dave and I hope everyone has a safe and healthy week ahead. Take care.
Thank you very much, everyone.